Right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Paul Appleyard. Paul has been involved in translation and software localization for many years, and he'll be talking to you about the different types of translation and interpreting and the skills needed. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Right, well, I've got really the simplest of introductions for you today. I mean, hopefully quite a few of you know most of what I'm going to be telling you anyway. Otherwise, you might not be in the right place. First of all, we do that right. Translation. Just to make sure we're absolutely clear, translation is what involves writing, whereas interpreting is spoken. That's one of the most common mistakes people make when speaking about our language. You see it every day, every week in the news. You hear about interpreters and translators in the wrong way. So, translators, the people who work with writing, translate adverts and all of these things here, effectively anything that is written. Translators, however, do tend to specialize the more they work. They specialize because that enables them to produce a higher quality translation and usually enables them to work at a higher speed. So everybody wins. The translator wins and the customer wins. Interpreters do all of these things here. Anywhere where speaking might be required in more than one language, because otherwise they may not be able to communicate. Now, in addition to these lists here, prisons, I've done quite a bit of work myself in prisons, where people have where people have done things and have not yet been able to express themselves appropriately. So then the interpreters have to go in and do the work, make sure that they can express themselves. My daughter has recently applied to go to a new secondary school. On the first page of the parent application form was a question about the mother tongue of the parents and whether translators and interpreters were needed there. So there are needs for people to do interpreting in all walks of life and not necessarily just in business. What do we need to work with languages? Foreign languages obviously is a fairly important part of it. If you're only speaking one language, then you're not going to do very well in a multilingual environment. However, much beyond that, the cultures and way of life is extremely important because you're not just translating or interpreting the words, you're translating and understanding the concepts behind the words in many cases. That's particularly important the further you move from one part of the world to different parts of the planet. The ability to communicate is absolutely crucial. If you can't communicate, same thing, teaching you how to suck eggs. If you don't know how to communicate, then the people who are listening to you or reading your words won't understand what you're talking about. If you can't speak, if you mumble, then your interpreting career is probably going to be short-lived. Quick thinking, the ability to appear to know what you're talking about is sometimes extremely important, and it's also very important to fit in with those around you. I've had the pleasure of working, as I say, in prisons quite a bit. If you go to prisons, you have to wear the same sort of clothes as those around you. One of the most important instructions if you work in prisons is not to wear proper ties, because if you wear proper ties, then some of the more unpleasant people around you may well decide they want to use your tie to garrote you. You can't speak if you're being strangled. However, if you are working in a high-profile business environment and you turn up wearing what you wore to prison yesterday and everybody around you is wearing Hugo Boss suits, then you are also dressed inappropriately. It's probably easier for a chap because you can just put on a suit and take the jacket off. But it's very important to make sure that you do fit in. The expression is to be dressed for court. Very important. If you're a translator, it's good to be able to spell. That's actually true of not just translators. We've all seen examples of bad spelling. Does everybody, no, I'm not going to ask the question, there are too many of you, but presumably everybody here understands the concept of working into your mother tongue? except in extreme circumstances. I get very, very, very emotional about this, and my sister lives in Barcelona, lucky girl. However, she thinks that she can translate into Catalan and into Spanish, and we have extremely enjoyable family discussions about why I think she's a complete fool to do so. As a general rule, in addition to what you have learnt on courses, I would really say that people working out of their mother tongue tend to work more slowly, in addition to not having a full grasp of the terminology. I do translation in order to earn money. If I was working more slowly, I would actually be earning less than if I was working into my mother tongue, because I wouldn't understand fully, etc., etc., etc. And making money is quite an important part of what I do, because I love my job dearly, but I like to live too. So if you don't translate into your mother tongue, you can come up with some interesting translations. We've all seen it on the menus, we've all seen it on the joke websites, the translation companies all have these sorts of things. I particularly love the bowels in spit. Isn't that lovely? I just want to go back and have seconds. There are, of course, very good examples of translation done by people who don't translate into their mother tongue, but it's just far too easy to pick up a dictionary, think that you can do it, and rattle on. People translating out of their mother tongue produce texts which, whilst apparently understandable, don't really say anything that you would really want to understand yourself if you were producing something into your own mother tongue. This, of course, does apply just to translators. Interpreters do tend to swing both ways. There are good reasons for that. Interpreters don't tend to write anything down, so unless you're unlucky enough to be being filmed, there's no evidence of the mistakes you've made, which is very important. And you're trying to impart a message more quickly when you interpret. But otherwise, when translating, don't do it the wrong way round. Translators working either way, the big institutions, you'll be seeing a film later about the EU, I think, they're the fun places to go for if you're looking for an in-house job. When I studied translation quite a long time ago, quite a few companies had in-house translation departments, but private companies in the main tend to go to translation agencies for their translation requirements now. So you're looking at the European Union, the United Nations, or other bodies of that sort, which means you have the opportunity to work usually in places like New York, Geneva, Paris, Brussels, not necessarily the sorts of places, are lovely places, but not necessarily where you want to end up. They usually have an entrance exam, which is a challenge, and you don't necessarily get the job even if you pass the entrance exam, because they're very popular. So the alternative is to freelance. Now, I've been a freelance translator for a few years. I'm not going to tell you how many. And it is good fun. However, before I was a freelance translator, I had what we call a proper job. In companies with bosses and coffee machines and lunch breaks and trips to the pub after work. There are lots of advantages. You can see some of them there. The best thing about not being an in-house employee anymore is commuting. There's something particularly enjoyable about putting the radio on in the morning and hearing that the M25 is blocked and it's going to take you 3 hours to get to Heathrow Airport, when all you have to do is go downstairs. Brilliant. The no sick pay point is obviously a challenge if you're feeling what we call death warmed up, not particularly well. Sometimes you struggle out of bed and you finish that translation, because if you don't, you won't get paid, and you don't want to let the agency who you're doing the work for down. The freedom point up at the top is absolutely brilliant, though. Yesterday, I spent 2 hours in the middle of the day putting up basketball equipment at a school. You can't do that if you've got a boss waiting for you. I had my phone with me. I was able to accept work. In fact, I did take on a job whilst I was doing that, but I did spend the middle of the day in a school playing field, which was brilliant. Hello. There we go. So that picture on the left is the sort of environment I used to work in. The picture on the right is the view from my office chair taken on Thursday. I've got a lovely garden table just outside where I can sit to make my telephone calls. There are vegetables growing. There are strawberries just out there at the moment on the right-hand side. So if you're feeling a little peckish, nip out, have a strawberry and talk to your customers. It would take an awful lot to get me back into the area on the left. I just look at it and shudder. You've got the printers, you've got the keyboards, you've got the telephones. Maybe you prefer that. I don't know. Now, interpreters. There are different talks, as we say. Now, the best place to look for basic information is on the ITI website. They've got one-page PDFs, which I will hold up and you won't be able to read. But if you go onto the ITI website, their information, which I'm going to say, is on there. Simultaneous, there's conference booths. I saw some in the room opposite as I walked in. Great fun. Extremely challenging. You'll sit in a booth or you do effectively whisper. They call it, you just rattle away in the background. You generally work into your own language, but you do often work both ways as well. Consecutive involves stopping and starting, which takes longer. And also, sometimes if you're working in conference room environments, people aren't used to working with interpreters and they tend to rattle on through you anyway. There are also less formal interpreting environments, ad hoc. If you think back to what I said right at the beginning about school, when you go into schools where there is just a need for communication, then different people will do it for different times. So a bit of fun there. Back to our translation. We've spoken about machine translation. Here we go. Machine translation is good fun. I would really go off and have a little play. Google have just announced a new online translation service in 5,000 million languages. I think they've said 21 languages. Go off and have a little play with it and see if you can work out why it can be a good thing, but why it can also be a fairly bad thing. Little example here. Defence to go on the grass doesn't really work. This is fun. What are these pom? Are they apples? Are they potatoes? And what's a Viennese shred? Whenever I go off to a machine translation system, I put in the expression Flying Scotsman. Anybody who's heard me speak before has spoken about the Flying Scotsman. Put Flying Scotsman into different languages, see what it comes out as in the target language, and then see what it comes back to in the original source language. This Flying Scotsman is a steam engine or a railway route, depending on where you're speaking. If you have the meta-knowledge, as some of the people will in this room, they will know that the Flying Scotsman or the Golden Arrow are steam engines. If you don't have that meta-knowledge, which a computer, poor thing, doesn't have, then you will never be able to understand that. Well, that takes a long time, so we'll do it the quick way. There we go. Today ago, 10 years, the 2 of May 1997, the iron door of Downing Street in the hand of his woman. However, it works, actually. So machine translation is not all bad. Our European friends often use this sort of machinery to get very quick translations of things that they want to understand quickly, but which they don't need to understand perfectly. So this sort of text would very often also be post-edited to improve. Anybody sitting in this room working into English would be able to improve this fairly quickly. But it does understand, it has imparted an understanding. And I have written down here that it creates a need for translation because then you might be asked to do a proper job afterwards. Translators and interpreters use lots of other aids. In the internet era, when I started translation, we used to go to Grant and Cutler, which is an excellent bookshop, dictionary shop just over the road somewhere, and used to spend between me, with my wife, we used to spend about £500 a year on dictionaries when we started. Now we've got a subscription to Termium, and we've got a Google, and we don't buy any other dictionaries, and we haven't been to Grant and Cutler for years. Maybe I'll go there today for a look. If you have a hunch about what a phrase or a translation should be, again, you can use a Google or a Wikipedia, and you can check whether your hunch is right. So we've all got extremely reliant on internet. I was on holiday a week ago with a translation, and I was in the Highlands of Scotland, connected via my telephone to the internet, and Mr. Vodafone turned off the signal for 3 days, which meant that I had to do an awful lot of work last week because I had 20,000 words to deliver, and I couldn't look up any words for 3 days. The nearest point where I could get a signal was 10 miles up the road in a lay-by. When you have got extremely used to using the internet, it's extremely hard not to use it. Now, translators also in many cases use voice recognition software so they don't have to type. I don't know if you've been at talks where people have raved about it. People who love translation software really adore it. Recognition software, and also translation memory software. We've all spoken about Trados as the market leader, Deja Vu, and a million others. If you've done a translation once and that translation has been accepted, then you need never worry about using or translating that sentence again. I love them. Absolutely love them. I didn't show you that. There we go. Now, I've rattled on far more quickly than you really wanted me to, but there we go. I've been translating or working in translation for over 20 years. It is an awful lot of fun. I've seen people who I would never have met if I had done a normal job. As I say, I've met prisoners, fascinating people. I've met Formula One people, interesting people. I've met people who design nuclear submarines, and I've done interpreting for them. So if nuclear submarines start sinking, it's probably my fault. I translated the bolts wrongly or interpreted the bolts wrongly. I've been to exciting places, including nuclear submarines, and places where they hand-build expensive luxury cars, airports, prisons. Challenges. Well, millions of them. The biggest challenge in this job is getting it right. And that challenge is the same challenge every time you do a job, whether it's an easy one you've done a million times before, or one you're doing for the first time because your client has asked you to, or you're trying to keep somebody happy, or whatever. Topics covered. Now, in the several years I've been doing this job, I think I've probably translated or interpreted on just about every subject known to man. I don't do patents at all, because patent translators are extremely clever, much cleverer than me, and they can get it right, and I probably would get it so wrong that the patents would fail in the other languages, but almost anything else, I've done it. Now, and job satisfaction, if you're interpreting and you're sitting in a room full of people, possibly a room such as this, and you can see on the faces of the people you're speaking to the recognition of the fact that they've realised what the person talking to your left-hand side has just said, then you feel you've got it right. If you've translated a website, and then you go onto the internet and you can see that website and realise that you've done the job, then that is extremely satisfying. If you ever do translate websites, don't give them out as references though, because very often you will translate a website and then somebody will update it. And the person who updates it will be a little secretary working round the corner in the office just behind the translation company. And what you've given out as a reference, you'll look at one day and you will realise that people think you can't translate because they've put all sorts of horrible bits in that you don't understand. Seeing press releases you've done is extremely satisfying, and sometimes when you've been doing it longer, realising that something that you did a long time ago is still there. My wife translated lots and lots of work for the port of Dover, which is a fascinating place, lots of boats, water, sea, France on the other side, and when we go down to Dover, every time we go, we can see her work. And luckily, it's always right. So that's quite satisfying. So I can't imagine now doing anything else. I've worked for proper companies, I've had bosses, I've had deadlines, I've been in companies that have downsized, I've been hired by different companies which have then downsized. I've got, where are we? Oh, gone, there we go. I've got that now. I can go out, I can do my own thing. I earn sufficient money to be comfortable. I'm never going to be able to buy my own Rolls Royce, but I wouldn't be able to afford to put petrol in it now anyway. But I cannot, for the life of me, consider doing anything else. There you are. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.